story is from another resident in my program, our program. She was the first one to submit the story, but she's on vacation. So I promised her that I will read the story for her. Of course, it's not her voice. She wrote it with a lot of compassion here, so I'll try and do the best I can. So the title of the story is A Bridge to the Other Side. It was a day like any other, the early morning rush through traffic to get to the hospital, queuing in line to get sign out on patients from an exhausted overnight intern, and the smell of Starbucks wafting through the passages and the regular organized chaos of morning activities typical of a teaching hospital. I was 3 months into my internship. I had packed up my possessions, my memories, my dog, and eventually my husband too, neatly into the designated parameters of shipping boxes and airline carriers, and set off to explore a new dream. I had been endlessly occupied settling into my new role as an intern, clerking patients, examining them, responding to calls of the vociferous and active pager, and surreptitiously yet inadvertently entering the lives of patients. It was on one such morning that I saw her. We were gathered on the round. I was listening to one of my colleagues present her story to the attending. She was about 60 years old, her delicate face burrow furrows of one who has known hardship, but has persisted with steely determination, and yet there was gentleness about her, as though through the virility at her core, usually hidden from the world, was now evident. She had long, thin black hair, soft skin, and weathered palms, those of someone who had known a hard life. My colleague mentioned pancreatitis, gallstones, cholangitis, and then it all came back to me, and I was taken to another continent, to a time barely 2 years ago, and I saw her again, this time, my mother. I was taken back to the time not too long ago when instead of being the healthcare professional receiving the history, I was providing it. When instead of getting consent for procedures, I was signing consent for those procedures. Time when I was waiting outside the operation room, in lobby, or on a couch somewhere, looking at the ceiling, waiting, wondering, and hoping. My mother was diagnosed suddenly with cholangitis. About 2.5 years ago, she had come for a national education meeting, and despite feeling unwell, she insisted I drive her an hour away so she could hand in her paper for the meeting before allowing me to take to the hospital for admission. She had gallstone obstructing her bile duct, required an ERCP. Unfortunately, the ERCP triggered pancreatitis, and over the next 11 weeks, as I sat by her bedside, I witnessed everything that pancreatitis can do to a 63-year-old woman. Each day was a new trial, 1 step forward and 2 steps backwards. A little improvement followed by deterioration, followed by prayers, calls, communication, followed by improvement, followed by deterioration. On and on the cycle went, and I found myself in a unique position with a different perspective, speaking to her doctors and understanding the scenario in an entirely different light, truly understanding the complexities of the situation and finding myself when my mother was unable to sign consent for her procedures. It was particularly difficult for me because just 18 months before that, I had lost my dad in a similarly protracted and painful situation. He had collapsed at the airport. I was 1,000 kilometers away at the time. This was nothing less than total anarchy to my world. My father, my mentor, the man who had taught me everything I knew about life, a man who had the rare quality of both being brilliant and kind, had fallen. He had extensive coronary disease. He was unstable for a cardiac bypass. The cardiologist inserted a balloon and spelled out to me that my father had suffered significant hypoxia and prognosis was grim. Over the next 7 weeks, we had encountered multiple challenges in his care and a limited number of options in terms of transferring him to another hospital due to his unstable condition. When he eventually passed away 7 weeks later, he had suffered so much that I had no option but to let him go. We buried him overseas in the town where he grew up, where he ran down the streets as a little boy. Due to my experience of losing my dad, somehow, when I took my mother to the hospital that day, I knew. I just knew that we were precariously close to treading down a similar path, and though my mother had a wonderful team of healthcare professionals who truly did their best to save her, it seemed to me that perhaps God was more adamant to have her. Those days of waiting as a daughter instead of a healthcare professional have changed me in so many ways. While I pride myself in always striving to maintain empathy for my patients, I can say I have seen the other side. I know what it is like to place your life in somebody else's hands, what it is like to wait outside the operating theater, what it is like when you have only one patient results that you need to follow up on, and when that one patient feels the most important patient. My parents taught me many things in life, but they taught me that through their deaths too. And while those are lessons that I sometimes wish I never had to experience, I cannot deny that those lessons too have been valuable. I have learned that when family members don't want to sign code status forms, even in futile situations, that often it's because they're hoping for a miracle that even they know may never come. I have learned what I may take for granted as routine in my working life is a unique experience for every patient. A trip to radiology, a physical examination, a history when the clinician doesn't see you, all of those are so important and such different experiences for patients and their families. My mother did not make it. She died due to complications related to pancreatitis. After 11 weeks of suffering and all her joys and sorrows, her victories and defeat culminated on that day. It still is a very painful experience for me, and losing my parents like that has probably been the biggest challenge in my life. My mind was diverted back to the patient before me, and she began to cry. A part of me wanted to cry with her, to cry for my mother, but in the white coat, I realized I had a different role in that story. When we lose those we love, when we have walked on the other side with patience, it gives us a new perspective and perhaps a slightly new direction too. This patient did recover. She made it. I do not know her name, but I see a little of my mother in her, and I remember her. Today is another day in the hospital, the same early morning bustle, and I have patients waiting for me, but I have crossed a bridge to the other side, and so I see so much more. So this was written by Dr. Aparna Daley.